Hey, it's Paris. You know, I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Dr. Emma and me on the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. And now, here are your hosts.
Hello and welcome back to the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. And today is Thursday, so that means it's Dr. Emma and me. I'm Rebecca Larson, joined by my co-host,
Dr. Emma in the house. Sorry, Rebecca, to say today's Tuesday. It's not Thursday, but this will be aired on Thursday, right?
You just shattered the illusion, Emma. You shattered the illusion.
Sorry. Not used to the showbiz, I guess, yet.
Showbiz.
Like, is it Thursday? Then I've lost 2 days of my life.
No. But this is the Thursday episode.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, guys.
I before we get into today's topic, I kind of want to go back because I think it's a lot of fun to kind of go back and see what people are saying.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the last episode. We discussed Margaret of Austria and Margaret of Parma. The week before that, it was Juana of Castile and Anne Boleyn. And then the very first episode was Isabel I of Castile and Catherine of Aragon, her daughter. So this has really been a fun journey so far, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it has. And you know what? We have been reading your comments. We've been reading your DMs. We've been going through the emails. And I kind of want to talk about some of the reactions and comments that came in after the last episode. So let's just kind of get into that before we get into today's episode. So we got some more suggestions. I feel like everybody's got.
I love these.
Everybody's got ideas of who we should pair up together. Leslie S. said she wants one on Henry VII and Reginald Pole.
Ooh, okay. Let me just think for a second there. Ooh.
Yeah, that one surprised me.
Interesting.
That one surprised me at first because I thought, is that a typo? Did she mean Henry VIII and Reginald Pole? But I'm taking it as Henry VII because that's the way it was typed.
Well, look into that. That's a very, very interesting suggestion.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. And then Brenda said she wants an episode on tool guys versus cool guys.
I love this, Brenda. I love it. Cool guys versus tool guys, a.k.a. people like Crybaby, Philip the Handsome, the Fair Philip of Habsburg, Henry VIII, Francis I. But then we do have cool guys, and we are going to talk about cool guys too, because there's so many cool guys in the Renaissance and the Tudor period, Yeah. So, Brenda, that's a great suggestion.
I immediately thought Henry VIII and Henry Guilford.
Ooh, fun guy.
Yeah, cool guy.
We're going to talk about fun guys today. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. And then Julie mentioned two really good ones too, I thought. Catherine Grey and Arbella Stewart, both, potentials for the throne of England.
I love it. I love a good female candidate to the throne. So
yeah, and I think they have very similar stories too. I think the two.
It would be interesting to see, sometimes you think people are very similar and then you go into the biographies and they weren't,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's another great suggestion too.
And I also want to talk about YouTube because that's where we get most of our comments. Like I do too. It used to be like YouTube. I was always very anxious to go look at the comments, but now there are like so many comments and they're so wonderful that we have to share.
I wonder why, Rebecca.
It must be you, Dr. Emma.
Must be us together, girl. I think that's it.
I was going to give it all to you today.
No. We're a team.
Well, we'll see because there is a lot about you in here.
You're the Beyonce. Remember that comment? You're the Beyonce. I'm Kaylee Rowland. I get to sing with David Guetta, so I'm fine.
I'm the Beyonce. That's just funny to me. Okay, so on YouTube, Cindy G said, "This is like sitting down with a couple of friends. Y'all cracked me up several times."
We are a couple of friends, and
Yeah.
when we hang out, we talk about the same stuff, guys.
Yeah.
So we're like fun but boring friends at the same time because we kind of like talk about the same stuff all the time.
We really do. If you think we talk about much else, we really don't.
No, we don't. But happy lives, because we love it, right?
That's right. That's right. And then we have Adrian L said, "You guys definitely make listening to history fun." And that one like really warms my heart because I think that's really what we want to do, isn't it?
Yes, since we were little girls, we've always been the funny ones and the quirky ones. Come on, Rebecca, confess. It's okay. We can do it now. I think we like it. Finally, we get to do it.
I was going to say, when I was little, I was just always the weird one. So
yeah, not me. Yeah, I was a weird one too.
Yeah, if you're into history a lot, you just tend to be the weird one, and there's nothing wrong with that.
When I was a kid, I was a lot into fantasy, and a lot of kids found that very funny. I'm still into fantasy, and I love it. So
yeah.
Maybe some of us are just like that, and it's totally fine.
We just have to step into our true, authentic selves, and I think everybody can see that this is you and me. This is who we are, even when we're not recording.
Yeah,
we are
pretty much. I mean, I use a different set of words usually, a lot more, but
yeah, me too.
Keep it clean in the podcast because you never know who's listening.
That's right. We want to keep it clean, definitely. Okay, so the next one is going to give you a big head, but I'm going to have to read it because it was a great comment. But I was like, oh, geez, Emma's going to like float off screen after I read this one.
Okay. I'm gonna drink a little bit of water.
Lisa D says, "Dr. Emma makes this history so relatable. I love to watch y'all on YouTube on the big screen." So she's one of those big screen life-size ones. "I love Dr. Emma's voice, accent, and knowledge." I know, right?
Okay.
And she said, "I appreciate the topics y'all cover. I love and appreciate the history lessons. Thank you both very much." So,
that warms my heart and makes me feel slightly uncomfortable because guys, I said I don't like my own voice very much.
Yeah.
Especially not when I hear it recorded, which I think we can all agree you always sound a bit different when you hear yourself, right?
Yeah.
I just it's a bit high pitched for my taste when I hear it back.
I'm
a prefer Rebecca's voice, to be honest.
Please. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I remember the first year was like just cringing every time I had to listen to myself.
Really?
And now it's like I don't even hear my voice when I'm editing.
And now you're like, oh, I'm so wise. I sound so good.
I sound so good. No, that's not usually what's going through my head. But I think everybody is a little bit self-conscious about their own voice and hearing their own voice. And that's okay.
You're right. Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
So it does kind of wear off with time?
Yeah, I think so. It did for me. Now I don't even notice it.
Maybe one of the things is I know I talk a lot, so I think that makes me a bit self-conscious too. Because then after I listened to the podcast to get better at it, I'm like, I talked way too much in that time again.
No.
But then I'm like, it's a podcast. I'm supposed to be talking.
It is. And especially, if let's say you're a guest on a podcast, or if you're a guest on this podcast, I want you to do the talking. It's not about me. It's about the person who has the knowledge on the subject.
Right. I do know things about certain subjects, not too many, but the ones I know about a lot.
Me too.
Oh, hyperfixation. It's very useful in life. If you're into history and art history, right?
That's right. And then there's another comment on here that I had to bring up because I mentioned in the last episode about my Creed story and my sweating and embarrassing myself. And
Creed is good. I was listening to some Creed. I was like, it's good. You know what I read? There's a very good study that says that if you listen to the music of your youth, we're still youngish, but the music you used to listen to in your 20s or even teens, because that made you happy then, it does trigger like good memories. I mean, it makes sense, right? And it makes you happy. So you should still be listening to all the stuff that you liked when you were a teenager. I still do.
I do too. And Creed, I
Yeah.
still listen to it. I know Creed has kind of become a joke on social media where like it just pops up everywhere, but I still
Yeah.
appreciate it. And Heather backed me up and said she likes some Creed too. So that was a little validation for me that
Any Creed concerts coming up, Rebecca? Road trip time or what?
Oh, you know what? I saw them twice. I don't think I need to see them again.
Yeah. And you don't want to see them again, right? Because of all these reasons.
After the
Let's send them a picture before they.
Do you remember me? I swear this time I'll sweat even more.
Yes. Maybe I can do better this time. I don't know.
Yes. Well,
I'll wear black.
that would have been much smarter instead of wearing like this tan color I was wearing and this material that didn't breathe. But
we're so hard on each other, on ourselves sometimes, right?
Yeah.
We should be less hard on ourselves. It's normal. You're meeting someone who you admire. It's normal that, well, you said you had a crush on him, not you admire, but so that's even worse.
I got to keep the show clean right now because I could tell some stories, but we'll keep it clean.
Rebecca, please.
We got to keep this PG.
Yes, let's keep it PG.
Okay, and then lastly, I forgot to mention that Brenda, who made a comment earlier, said that she also would like to join us at the Prado because we talked about that.
What I'm talking about?
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot more comments like that because we're going to make this happen. I think that's a great idea, Brenda. You should come after that amazing comment you had, and you want to come to the Prado Museum. Hey, you're our kind of girl.
Yeah, let's do it. We could have some fun, couldn't we?
And we can invite some cool guys too. It's not just ladies, everybody's invited. I think we can make it happen. We could get out there, and Rebecca's never been.
No.
So, well, I think it would be great. I don't know. What would you expect? Do you think you would be blown away?
I think being in Spain, first of all, I'd be blown away because I really don't know any Spanish.
You do. We've been practicing. I give her a hard time. But she's very good. She's getting much better.
No, I'm not. You keep acting like I'm getting better. She has me practice words and then I get so embarrassed because I'm terrible. German, like that's the only language I've ever been able to speak.
That's a different type of part of your life. Now you're going to go to Spain and you just, it's just practice makes perfection.
I'll get
there.
The
same way you said that, the voice thing with the podcast, this is the same with languages. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
This is going to turn into a language podcast and in a year, Rebecca's going to be like, hola todos.
I would love it if one day I could open the show in Spanish. So we'll work toward that.
Okay. Yes. I'm excited for that.
Speaking of the Prado.
Yes.
Today's episode, we haven't even talked about what the subject matter is going to be or anything, but today's episode is going to be a little bit different for Dr. Emma and me because we decided to invite a guest today, didn't we?
Yes, we have a guest today who works at the Prado Museum in Madrid. He has worked for 25 years there. But previously, he was a professor here in the States and several universities, Columbia University, also in California. And he's a very cool guy. So I'm very excited for this episode. And you're going to meet him finally. He's been a guest in the show. Give another hint there. But I really would like Rebecca to introduce him.
I knew you were going to do that. She's just trying to catch me. She just wants me to practice my Spanish and my rolling of my R's and the J's.
Yep.
Well, I'm not him right now, but we are going to head over to the interview and welcome him to the show and see what our topic is going to be today for Parallel Lives, aren't we?
It's going to be very, very cool.
All right, I'll see you over there.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome back here with Rebecca and our guest, our cool guy, Alejandro Vergara, who's already been a guest to this show, talking about his books and all his expertise, because he's the head of the Flemish and Northern Schools Paintings Department at the Prado Museum and has been for how long, Alejandro?
I think 26 years, but the cool guy couldn't come, so it's just me today. Then,
okay. And he is here to talk about. Would you like to let us know what you're going to talk us about, Alejandro? We asked him to do a special episode on two cool guys in art history.
Yeah, I think based on Plutarch's comparative lives, you guys have been doing comparisons between historical figures, and today you and I spoke about doing something on Velázquez and Rubens, two of the heights of the history of European art, among many, I should add. No, it's a great thing if we think about how many great artists there have been, and the number is quite large, fortunately for all of us. But those are two of the giants who coincided in life at one point for up to 9 months. So we can talk about an actual meeting, and they share a lot of traits that are the result of a similar social context, and they have differences, which is what comparisons are useful for, to find differences.
Yeah,
that's great. And Rebecca was telling me that you had been watching a documentary on Rubens lately, Rebecca, and you found something really. Maybe you should let Alejandro know, because I think you'd really like that.
Yeah. So this, episodes like this, when it comes to art, I appreciate these episodes, but they really aren't my wheelhouse. So last night I was watching a documentary on Rubens because I wanted to learn a little bit more about him. And I noticed something, and I told Emma, she didn't even know this about me, but I really love to draw faces. I love to take an image of somebody's face and try and sketch it myself and see how close I can get it to the actual picture that I'm trying to copy. And one of the things that is the most difficult for me to capture is the eyes. Because the eyes, if you don't get them right, they just fall flat. And I noticed with Rubens that he really had a talent for making his subject's eyes look so real, like you're looking into the soul of this person. And that, to me, that was amazing when I noticed that. So he was very talented.
Yeah, I would say you would probably say the same thing if you opened up on your screen and looked at Velázquez's portrait of Juan de Pareja at the Met in New York, and that gaze is so alive and so immediate. It seems to be right there. There you are in front of this guy who lived in the 17th century. Wow. So I think a lot of when we're talking about great artists, they share common virtues such as a sense of liveliness, the ability to convey a sense of palpitating, true to life, even more than true to life, lifelike individual. But then they're quite different on the other hand. They seem to focus on different things, or at least, when I was thinking about what we would do today, I was thinking about what I'm going to learn about what Rubens is good at and what Velázquez is good at, because I'm kind of stuck in a rut when I think about the two of them, which is not a bad place to be. But I've thought long about them all my life, or much of my life, and I think I understand what is great about each one of them. But of course, we each relate to art differently, and art tells each one of us a different truth. And I'll learn from what you and Emma have to say today. So my only question with regards to what you just said is, I wonder what you would think if you saw Velázquez's eyes in a portrait also. I think you would say something very similar, that he was incredibly talented in that regard as well.
Yeah, well, now I feel like after the show, I'm really going to have to go through a bunch of his art to take a look, because I believe you. I mean, Rubens really surprised me. I was familiar with him, but only as far as maybe like his self-portraits. When I would see those, I would know it was him. Oh, that's Rubens. So when I started looking at his portraits of other people, that was the first thing that stood out. So yeah, I'm going to do some more research after this.
One of his most beautiful portraits. Sorry, Emma. One of his most beautiful portraits is one of his daughter, Clara, when she painted. He painted it when she was about 4, 16 or so. And it's incredible how that reflects not only a physical presence in a way that's uncanny, but also something more than that, his love for her. I would encourage everybody who's listening to us to try to open that webpage on the portrait of Clara Rubens and the collection of the Princess of Liechtenstein. There's other portraits of her, but that one. And what you see is this incredible talent that he has for painting something other than appearance. And that other thing in this case is how much he loves her. He's just painting this incredible love of a father for a little girl that all of us who have, well, we've all loved someone, and we know that that feeling is something that goes beyond ordinary life. And there he goes. He paints it. He can paint it, and also he paints the way she looks back at him in full confidence implies also an ease around this man that also is telling about the little girl looking at the father, because that's how comfortable she is. I think to me, that's the greatest virtue. I know I'm jumping ahead, but I would say the greatest virtue of Rubens is that his art takes us beyond art to life, to things such as that. You look at how he paints his daughter, and you remember your own love for your own daughter, things like that. And sometimes painters are great because they paint incredibly well. Rubens it's a different thing. I think he's great because he takes us towards things in life that are what makes, what being alive is about. It can be happiness, it can be sadness, but it's always intense and kind of an exalted state of being. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself.
I think you're pretty clear that you like Rubens more, Alejandro. Let's be honest. To start with, but I think you're right that, and I know you love that portrait and you talk often about it. And I was thinking about that and trying to think about Velázquez, and he has a very interesting portrait of a little girl that's in the Hispanic Society that I was lucky enough to see it last year in the Royal Society in London. And it's an unknown girl. And she, when you say that how comfortable Clara is with her father, when I see this portrait of Velázquez of this little unknown girl, there's kind of almost like a fear in her eyes. I don't think she looks as comfortable, even though it's a portrait that, since I saw it, especially one thing that Alejandro told me is that you have to see the artworks live to experience and to really learn about them, because an image in a computer is not going to give you the same feeling, right? And when I saw this picture live, I was like, she almost looks a bit scared. Almost.
Well, I think Velázquez often paints etiquette, proper behavior at the time. I think he is maybe less sensitive to that inner heartbeat that makes us, what so uniquely what we are. Let me say one thing about what you said earlier, whether I like Velázquez more or less, which in the end is really irrelevant, even though it's a good way to think about art. I remember when I was a kid, my father would love some things, hate others, and I remember thinking about art in a very lively way, as if a lot was at stake. And I don't agree with what he said, but I do think it's a good way. It's like sports. I love this one. I hate the other. He's horrible. He's great. But one thing about that, almost everybody from about, 1820 onwards would probably say that Velázquez is better. That's a bad word, but I would say most people would favor Velázquez over Rubens from the early 19th century up until our times. Mm-hmm. I think we would also form a larger queue outside a museum of a Velázquez exhibition than of a Rubens exhibition. Mm-hmm. That may be in part because we know about 100 Velázquez paintings and about 1,500 Rubens paintings, so he is more rare. And mm-hmm. almost all the great Velázquezes are in Madrid. There's a few exceptions, London, New York, Vienna, but almost everything's in Madrid. So if you had a show in New York of Velázquez, it would be a rare thing. Mm-hmm. And Rubens is more easier to see. You can see great Rubenses in many more cities. But there's not only that. I think Velázquez he speaks more to a more materialistic time. Maybe that's a bad term. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it a time that values the facticity of things, the way things really are. One of the, look around you, this table, my hands, the mouse of the computer, the tactile qualities of my computer, all these things, the actual appearance of things, as if there was a truth in them. And he seems to elevate that truth of common things. And Rubens is more rhetorical. He's more about grand feeling and deep emotion, in the sense that you would find in ancient poetry, for example. You can imagine feeling terribly sad and hurt by the loss of someone, as explained in the Iliad, for example. Mm-hmm. Velázquez is more about the beauty of the bark of a tree that you see walking down the street today or any other day. So we have learned to see them as artists that are about two very different things. And I think that's fair, that they're sensitive to different aspects of life. And that's why, in the end, comparing is useful if you're trying to gain insight into what's characteristic of each one. It's not useful if you're trying to say this one wins and this one loses. There's no point in that, really.
So you're not going to declare a winner at the end?
Definitely not. Or okay. Just before you do, I'll leave.
No, when you were talking before, when Rebecca mentioned the eyes, that reminded me of Instagram Live that you did in the Prado, talking about a painting by Rubens where there's a very special cow, right, who is crying, and that reminded me, Rebecca's comment, that Instagram Live that you did, because in that painting, that cow is crying, and you explain why, right? Because he's trying to convey a message with that painting, isn't he?
That's a really good story for us today. Let me go back a little bit, and I may give you a long answer now. Rubens paints for the King of Spain, Philip IV, who's the king that Velázquez portrays often, and so does Rubens. But we know Velázquez's portraits better. They're at the Prado and they're more famous. Rubens paints for the Spanish king, for whom he works as court painter and as the diplomat, indirectly as court painter, but as a diplomat. Rubens, as a Fleming, or what we now would call a Belgian, is part of the Spanish monarchy and works for the Spanish monarchy. So he paints for the king a series of mythological paintings, 1637-38. He sends them to Madrid. Most likely the person receiving them in Madrid is the court painter in Madrid, who's 22 years younger than he is, who is Velázquez. Oh. Most likely Velázquez is receiving the paintings in Madrid and hanging them in the palace for which they're meant. And a few years later, about 20 years later, he paints another painting of that same theme, Mercury and Argus. Yeah. And this really is a great comparison in terms of two painters painting the same subject, the later younger painter painting his version after he already knows what the older painter has done some 20 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Rubens' painting, it's interesting to look these up. They're both at the Prado, Mercury and Argus by Rubens and Mercury and Argus by Velázquez. I've always found the Rubens a bit awkward, but I fairly recently found a way into the painting that now has turned it into one of my favorite artworks, or that's kind of a silly phrase, but one of the artworks that makes me feel most. If you look at that picture, there's a young cow to the left, and the story comes from several sources. Ovid is one of them, but there are others. They talk about a heifer, a beautiful heifer, who is a young girl who Jupiter has found beautiful. He's come down to Earth from Mount Olympus. He's raped her, and then he's disguised her into a heifer, because he's worried about what Juno, his wife, is going to do. Juno looks down and sees this herd of cows and finds that one of them is a lot cuter than the others. And so she's suspicious, and this is Io. And, the story goes on and branches off. But what's significant for the painting is that Io has lost her family, her father and her sisters. And she doesn't realize she has been turned into a heifer, into a young cow. And one day she sees herself reflected in a river, realizes she's no longer a young girl, lifts her head, finds her father, who she's lost and who she's desperately looking for, and starts crying because he doesn't recognize her as she starts to lick his hands. And it's really a devastating moment. It's really painful when you read that in a good translation, in a poem that moves you. And the way Rubens paints this face is just all pain. It's really the pain of lost love. In this case, it's love of a daughter for the father. But it's incredible how powerful it is. If you look at Velázquez's painting, which is, again, about 20 years later, one of his last paintings, 1650s, and again, he knows Rubens's picture when he paints his. It's incredibly skillful. I would say upon first viewing, it's much more impressive than Rubens's painting. It's very horizontal. It's meant to be placed above a door, so it has an odd format. I'm looking at a photo right now, and you see Mercury kind of creeping up onto a ledge where Argus is, and Argus is sleeping. His job is to make sure Io doesn't run away. and he's just going to have his head chopped off by Mercury in a minute. Io is much more discreet in Velázquez's story. She's in the background, and to me, she plays a formal role. It's a much more discreet painting, I find, in terms of its emotion. And I think it's a more beautiful painting formally in terms of the brushstrokes. It's more subtle. There you have two strengths of these two artists. Velázquez is incredibly beautiful in terms of how the very subtle, discreet sweep of the brush that, with apparently no effort, creates these beautiful passages of transparent layers of color. And Rubens, on the other hand, paints these somewhat awkward figures. That's the way they seem to me, the shepherd and the god, Argus and Mercury. But then you get to the head of that heifer in Rubens, and you want to cry with them. You really do. I mean, you can get goosebumps looking at that. So there you go. One way of comparing the two is Velázquez is about art in this painting, and Rubens is about life. I think the same thing is true if you think about another comparison that's also useful, which is Rubens and Van Dyck. Van Dyck he's a good third figure to bring in here. For one reason, he's Velázquez the same age, born 1599, 22 years younger than Rubens, but he works in Antwerp, so he doesn't only coincide with Rubens not for 9 months in the studio, he's there all his life. And he's overwhelmed with Rubens, who was the dominant painter in Europe at the time. And Van Dyck, in a way, he can't really stick his head out and show his talent, which is immense. And he seems to choose to paint the most elegant outfits and dresses and poses and portraits you can imagine. But in the end, I have a sense that they are about art, not quite about life. And which of the two is greater? Well, that's for each one to say. But that's probably not a fair comparison to Velázquez, but it does highlight what's great about Rubens, that he's about life. He's about something greater than art.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and all these people are very related to England too. Let's not forget that this podcast, we always talk about the English court. And one thing that I was doing a little bit of research for this episode, Rebecca might find this interesting, is that the Prince of Wales visited Madrid in 1623, right? The future Charles I of England was in Madrid in 1623. And I read at 100% true that I think Velázquez painted him. And then Rubens worked for Charles I too. So, and Van Dyck wasn't.
Yeah, Velázquez doesn't paint him. No, I don't. Velázquez doesn't paint him. I think I don't know this. I should have looked this up, but I think there's a question about whether Velázquez can paint him. But then the king says if he paints him, he'll never finish because he's so slow. Velázquez
I didn't know that.
He says that about someone at some point, and Velázquez is fortunate enough to have a king who is really sensitive, a real art lover, and who realizes Velázquez is slow, he's whimsical, he's, not full of energy, not passionate, but I'll let him do his thing because he knows how great he is, and what the result of that is that he receives his art. But you're right, Rubens is in Madrid from late August 1628 until April 1629, shares a studio with Velázquez, paints for the king, competes with Velázquez, we can say, by painting an equestrian portrait of Philip IV, which takes the place of one Velázquez had painted earlier. Velázquez, again, 22 years younger, not at the stage in his career where Rubens is. Velázquez doesn't see this as competition. His father-in-law, writing about Rubens in Madrid with information from Velázquez, writes very admiringly of Rubens because he's just a big star at the time. But then Rubens goes on to England to continue these negotiations for a peace treaty between Spain and England, where he's representing the Spanish king. And he becomes a real favorite painter to Charles I of England, indeed, and paints for him and paints him. And Van Dyck is the great painter of the court of Charles I of England. Yeah. Very important to think about a similarity between Rubens and Velázquez. They're both court painters, and court painters for the great monarchical courts in Europe, which means at this time England, France, and Spain mainly. I guess Vienna would be another one. Velázquez paints for them as well. But this is, being a court painter is being all that you can be. The idea of the bohemian painter working in isolation, receiving this kind of romantic inspiration from the clouds, that's a later thing. Caravaggio begins perhaps more or less contemporary, a little younger than Rubens, but painting about this time. He maybe starts the career of the bohemian, the difficult confrontational personality. But Velázquez and Rubens, they inhabit the same social space, which is court society, which is very strict in its rules. They both want to be inside players. They both want to play by its rules. They're both painters, which that society is saying that is something not of high value, socially speaking. If you're a painter, you're not a lot. It's very hypocritical of courts at the time because kings love the art of painting and they compete for painters, but they're still paying them as little as they can, and they're still not thinking of them as socially worthy of merit. It's beginning to rain hard here. I don't know if we're gonna get thunder or whatever. We'll see. But anyway,
maybe it's Rubens from afar. We're talking about
a storm in Madrid. But actually, now that you've mentioned that, Rubens paints incredible storms. Look for one in Vienna. It's fitting. It's really fitting for Rubens to paint storms, these grand spectacles where the energy of the world shows itself. The beauty of Velázquez is discreet. A famous artist said of him that he appears to paint only with his will, pinta solo con la voluntad, as if he painted with no effort. And there's a real beauty that comes with that too. You look at what he does, and it is so real looking, and it seems to have been done without any effort at all. And that quality, effortlessness, I don't think anybody's ever been as good at showing that quality in painting as Velázquez has been. And he's been acknowledged as such by a lot of artists, really. So that would be his quality, how, the understatement, perhaps, the beauty of understatement. Rubens would be the exact opposite, the beauty of grand statement, loud, heavy metal, or opera, or...
You can relate more to that.
Or a big thunderstorm, yeah.
But
court society is key. The rules of court society define the life of both.
I think that, if I were 22 years older than someone that comes along and can effortlessly do something not better than me, but very, very good, I would be a bit annoyed, I think, because, and also I was thinking, that made me think, Rebecca, when he mentioned competing, automatically my brain went to Torrigiano and Michelangelo. Remember the story we always tell?
How can I forget?
Torrigiano hitting Michelangelo and breaking his nose because Michelangelo was making fun of Torrigiano, right? Do we have a story like that? Did they ever get their hands on each other, or just the brushes, Alejandro? No? Do we know?
No, I'm afraid not. And I think, again, think of a society where hierarchy and etiquette mattered way more than now, and they still matter now more than we tend to think, but even way more than now. Rubens has an episode early in his life, and Velázquez has an episode late in his life that show a similar set of problems. Rubens is, he wants to succeed in court society, and that means he wants to be accepted by aristocrats and by royalty. But he's constantly receiving messages from them that he's not worthy. That what I was I wanted to mention a trip that he took. His first trip to Spain, Velázquez is only 4 years old, not a painter, not in the picture. He's in Seville. Rubens goes to Madrid and Valladolid, where the court of Philip III is. And when he gets there, he's an envoy from the Duke of Mantua in Italy, for whom he's working at the time, 1603. And he brings some gifts from the Duke of Mantua to the King of Spain, horses and paintings. And he starts complaining in his correspondence with the secretary of the Duke in Italy, in Mantua. He says, your ambassador in Spain did not allow me to be close to the king as he had promised. Your ambassador did not allow me to show myself. I have been sent as an envoy to bring paintings, but those paintings do not include a single touch by myself. So in other words, I'm not bringing my own paintings. He's very frustrated with not being allowed to show himself. That's the only way to overcome social prejudice at the time, is closeness to nobility, or even better, royalty. Yeah. And people fight for that closeness. And, an Italian aristocrat is not going to let this young, at the time, Flemish painter, who is a workman, who, works for a living, to get close to the king. And Rubens suffers that all his life, even though he's very successful at being very close to royalty. And he, in the end, I would say that he achieves notoriety. But if we asked the distinguished aristocrat from the time now, he would have said, well, he wasn't one of us. Velázquez, at the end of his life, wants to be a noble. He wants to also, around 1659, 58, 59, he dies in 1660. Rubens has died 40 years earlier in 1640, just so we keep them both in mind there. Velázquez wants to be a nobleman, even if it's kind of the lower ranks of the nobility, which Rubens has succeeded in entering also. There's kind of an inflation in nobility at the time. The kings and queens are naming more noblemen and noblewomen, so they have more support. But of course, the old nobility is saying, okay, but we're better. We're nobility of blood. We had it by birth, and these people are only having it because it's being given to them. But Velázquez, at the end of his life, he actually will officially solicit nobility. And he has 125 witnesses lie about how he's never actually worked to make a living, which he did. He made paintings. And he has 125 witnesses sign papers and submit papers in favor of his request to become a nobleman. And he doesn't achieve it. That, in the end, the board is supposed to decide on this, says no. And he will be ennobled, lower ranks of the nobility, in the end by the Pope and the King, because they can overrule all these other people. But so what's important about this is perhaps less so that they both have to kind of beg, and they're both allowed, regrettingly, at the end, to become part of that lower nobility. But more important than that, perhaps, is how much it matters to both to be part of that. So they're both inside players. They both want to play by the rules, right, in a game that says people like you are not worthy. It's really it's a paradox that defines the life of both these men. And that way, they're very, very similar.
That's a pity, because we do like a bar fight story, right, Rebecca? She always likes the Torrellano story. I mean, maybe Torrellano and Caravaggio would do a good parallel lives, because they seem to have the bad character. So these guys are like nice guys? Is that what you're saying?
Well, Torrellano's a lot earlier. Torrellano's a lot earlier than Caravaggio. I remember recently I read a little story about Caravaggio, real story, in the archives, in the documents. He ordered an artichoke, and then there's a discussion as to whether he's ordered it fried in butter or oil, and he gets into a brawl and fights the waiter, and they sue each other. So he actually gets into a brawl in a bar over an artichoke. I don't see Velázquez and Rubens. They think of themselves as they're proper. They want to be accepted by people that are more. It's like being liked by their grandmother, kind of thing.
Okay. So
they can't be fighting each other.
Ones. They behave.
That's right.
Yes, that's good. That's great. And another thing that you mentioned the Spanish monarchy, but another important thing that I think is very cool is that they're both very influenced by Italy, right? They both traveled to Italy. So these are worldly guys too. They're not just in Flanders or in Spain or in England. They're everywhere, really, and especially in Italy.
Well, yeah, more so. Rubens, as a diplomat, travels a lot: France, England, Holland, Germany, Spain, Italy. Velázquez travels as an artist and an envoy of the Spanish king to buy works of art. Goes to Italy twice in his life. Every ambitious artist, there are exceptions. Rembrandt is one. He's a little bit later. He's like 7 years after Velázquez. But every ambitious artist at the time, from wherever, needs to go to Italy. Italian artists don't need to go anywhere else. So Italy is the capital of the arts. The other one is Flanders in terms of numbers of paintings made for export and amount of talent. But Italy is where the standards of taste and fashion are set. And that is mainly because Italy is seen as the home of antiquity. People don't go to Greece. Greece is in Ottoman hands at the time. Uh-huh. But people go to Rome because there's a huge and shared prejudice in favor of anything ancient that has to do with antiquity. So they all go to Rome. And in Rome, they find antiquity and the best modern version of antiquity, which is Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, early 16th century painters
the
as well.
Ninja Turtles. Sorry, we made a joke some episodes back about the Ninja Turtles. Remember the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Rebecca knows,
I'm afraid I was no longer a teenager, so I skipped that.
Okay. Because every time you'd say those names in to me, the song comes to my brain.
Was it all three?
There was like 5, wasn't there?
Oh, there was Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and
Donatello.
So who wrote that script? That's incredible. Whoever wrote.
I know, right? That's how we learned about those guys.
and those were Japanese. Those were Japanese cartoons or whatever you call them.
I don't know. I think they were American, weren't they?
Yeah, as far as I know, they were American, unless they were readapted.
In the sewers, or New York. Where did they live?
Gosh, you're really that was like 30 years ago. Come on now.
30 years ago.
I guess it's my time to leave. Expertise has moved along, and it's my time to leave this podcast.
We're talking about the Ninja Turtles. I am sorry. I am very sorry.
I apologize for the reference to the 90s TV show. But yeah, no, it's they both are, because they choose these names because these guys are so big, right? Leonardo.
They were, yeah. They were. I don't think they were that big in the 90s, really. I remember. I was more of a fan of Beavis and Butthead, but that's another story.
No, I mean,
me too.
I mean the actual artists. The actual artists. They use references to famous people, right? Yeah.
It's interesting that in growing up in Madrid, I would say in Europe in general, probably in the West in general, maybe in the world in general. But art is something we've all been taught to admire. High culture, Shakespeare is admirable. Leonardo is admirable. We all share this prejudice in favor of high culture. It's something we should take care of. It's economists talk about kind of this acquired learning when you don't need to relearn everything. It's kind of an economic skill. If you trust your forebears, you gain some time, because you build upon what you've been taught. And sometimes, we're rebellious and we don't want to do that. But I've grown up in a city where the greatest thing around was the Prado Museum. And we were all very aware of that since we were little kids, really, that the local pride fell upon the Prado, or sat at the Prado more than anywhere else. And but maybe the football teams, but mainly the Prado, I would say.
And not of Spain. I grew up in Santander in the north, and it was the same. It's our flagship cultural institution, and everyone in the world knows about it. Every person I've talked to in the U.S. knows about it. Every person I travel to knows about it. And it's a beautiful place. I'm trying to convince Rebecca, by the way, speaking of how Velázquez and Rubens went to Italy to, see the best art and learn from the best, how she needs to come to Spain to try the best food and go to the Prado Museum, right, Alejandro? I'm trying to convince her because she has never been to Spain. So
yeah, you should. You know me. There's so many great places to visit. Spain is one, but there are many others too. So just go somewhere, wherever.
Yeah, she's going to England this year. This is your second time going to England, right, Rebecca?
Yes. So the plan is to go there.
Rebecca, in England, in London, among the best Velázquez is out of Spain, especially a picture of Venus and Cupid known as the Roque Venus in the National Gallery in London.
My favorite.
incredibly beautiful. That again, that very subtle combinations of greens and blues and the sash that Cupid wears, or just apparently with no effort, he creates these beautiful layering of colors that is, this extraordinary beauty that comes from oil paint, which is something kind of unexpected. It's a gift for all of us. And also in the National Gallery in London, a few galleries away from Velázquez, you have Rubens paintings. To me, the great Rubens in the National Gallery is called The Watering Place. It's a landscape with cows and so on. And you'll see the sense of the promise of ongoing growth of nature. That's, the sense of the heartbeat underlying the forms and colors of nature and the land and the trees and so on. And again, in the case of Rubens, you'll notice his huge array. He has a huge array of tools. You have a sense that he moves his brush in a lot of different ways. And in Velázquez, you have a sense that he moves his brush without even noticing almost. So it's a really good museum to see really, really great examples. If I could isolate two, the Rokeby Venus by Velázquez and the Watering Place by Rubens, focus on those two. There are a lot of others. I mean, there are a few other Velázquez, not a lot. And there are a number of other Rubens' paintings in the National Gallery in London, but especially those two. And also another thing, the Wallace collection, a beautiful Velázquez portrait, and another beautiful Velázquez and another beautiful Rubens landscape in the Wallace collection in London as well. Yeah, that's important too.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I mentioned previously this documentary that I watched last night on Rubens, and one of the things that they mentioned, and sometimes when it comes to documentaries, I know that they're not always 100% factual, so you'll have to correct me if this is wrong. But Rubens was commissioned by Charles I to paint a ceiling mural for him in Whitehall Palace, I think it was. And he didn't paint it there. He painted it back home. And when it arrived in London, they rolled it out and realized that the size was wrong. And then they had to cut it down. Do you know anything about that? Is that a true story?
I don't know about that. I should, as a Rubens expert, which I am, I think. But we know that there's a really good book on that, a big, brainy book only on that commission. I wasn't aware of that, actually. I thought he must have painted much of it in Whitehall Palace. I've seen it a number of times. I would say, to my taste in this case, the sketches, which is what he would have done to show the client, are more beautiful, I find, in this particular case. But we know Rubens paints a lot, again, for the French court, for the English court, for the Spanish court. In the case of the Spanish court, I do know for a fact that some of the paintings that form part of that same commission for which the Mercury and Argus was made, some of those were sent back to Antwerp from Madrid because the dimensions were wrong. So that was part of the issues a big, very popular painter ran into. Think of the art of painting from about 1510, 1520 as a luxury export industry based in a few cities in Italy, a few cities in Belgium, mainly Antwerp and Florence, probably. And so they're making paintings to send abroad, and they have packaging technology and crane technology, and they've worked all this out, but they run into problems. So I know for a fact that happened in some cases. I wasn't aware of that in Whitehall. But again, there's a great book, a great collection of volumes on Rubens' art called the Corpus Rubenianum. And the volume on Whitehall ceiling is very, very good by a man called Gregory Martin. And you can find that there yourself, sorry to say.
We do have one of the preparation sketches in the Minneapolis Institute of Art by Rubens. So one of them is in here. You can go and see it in Minneapolis. And what I know about that, it's a gruesome fact, is those were the last artworks that Charles I ever saw. Because his head was chopped off in Whitehall. Yeah. Yeah.
Interestingly,
the first painting in his inventory is a painting by Rubens. So clearly Charles became almost obsessed with Rubens. Not so much Velázquez, because I haven't found any reference to Velázquez in his inventory. Isn't that stood out to me?
It's an interesting fact when comparing the two, also simply thinking about the different,
Yeah.
ways of working in the world. Velázquez is court painter. He doesn't paint that much, a bit over 100 paintings. There are a few decades where he paints just a couple of paintings, and he's court decorator. He goes to Italy to buy works of art for the king. He's not very productive, and he paints in Italy for other patrons, for some aristocrats, for Pope Innocent X. Beautiful portrait of Innocent X by Velázquez, still in the Doria Pamphili collection in Rome. But other than that, Velázquez is not known out of Spain until the 19th century, when French travelers began to come to Madrid to look at the Prado. Remember, the Prado has the largest collection in the world of Titian, of Bosch, of Rubens, of Velázquez, of Goya, many things. In the 19th century, art tourism starts to focus on Madrid as an alternative to Italy. There's kind of a different tradition here, the Venetian, Velázquez, Rubens, Goya. And that's when Velázquez starts to turn into a household name for art lovers, not before the 1820s or 30s. Rubens is very well known around Europe already during his own lifetime. So that's a very big difference between the two. Simply in London, they may have heard of Velázquez, the king talking to the king or writing to the king, but no more than that. And he was simply not well known out of the one place where he painted, which was the Spanish court in Madrid, and a little bit in Italy during his 2 trips there, but very little. Very big difference there between the two. Rubens is very, very famous during his lifetime, very influential. Think of French Rococo painting. It's largely a spin-off of Rubens' aesthetics. Velázquez will be very influential in Paris and France when France is capital of the art world, but only in the 19th century, not before then.
So the fact that Rubens has a bigger productivity also means that his works probably have been sold more over the centuries, right? Because I know that, for example, yes, there's no references in Charles I's collection, and that ends up everywhere in Europe. But then I study a lot the British Royal Collection, and Queen Victoria bought at least 2 portraits by Velázquez's workshop, not him. And I think it's because she wanted to have Velázquez, because it's just something that in the 19th century they like, but there's not a lot of paintings out there to buy. That's what I mean. So
that's right.
Maybe why it's more prestigious in a way, because it's less to buy and so more rare.
I think possibly so, but Rubens at his highest end, which is hundreds of paintings, when he's not painting, when he's not letting his assistants make paintings, it's also very high end, meaning he paints for the king, the Pope, all these people. In both cases, I would say that their best paintings were in public collections, what we would now call public collections, which at the time were the private collections of kings and likewise, already during their lifetime. So you could not buy the greatest Rubens or the greatest Velázquez in the 18th or 19th or 20th century. They were already in the great collections of Europe. In the case of both artists, another painting that has the greatest, it could claim to be the greatest Velázquez out of Spain. One would be the Roque de Venus, maybe the Juan de Pareja, the Met. Another one would be the Water Cellar of Seville, which is an absolute house. That's another painting in London. And that's there because the Duke of Wellington received it as a gift by the King of Spain in the early 19th century and took it to London. But that's the beginning of the world being aware of this huge talent that was local until that time, which is Velázquez. And again, because he's a court painter, that's me. He's a civil servant. That's what he does. And he does it there. And that's it. Rubens becomes international in part because of his involvement in diplomacy, but in part also because he just has this superhuman energy. I mean, he's just an incredibly ambitious, energetic person.
I'm going to put Rebecca on the spot because we did share some pictures before the episode, self-portraits of Velázquez and Rubens. And Rebecca, who do you think looks cooler?
Oh, gosh. Why do you have to put me on the spot? I don't know. I think I'm more of a fan of Rubens. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, good. I think that was the right answer.
Let me say something, Emma. One of the great Velázquez, and both Rubens and Velázquez have had great scholars devote their entire lives to studying them. one of the great Velázquez scholars was Jonathan Brown, who I was fortunate enough, because I really was very close to him, to study. I did my PhD with him in New York, and I'm a great admirer. He passed away. But he writes in his introduction to this is his beautiful book on Velázquez.
Mm.
Is this upside? Is this?
No,
anyway,
you're
this
good.
Right. Okay.
No, it's good. It's good.
In the introduction to that book, he writes about how he became interested in Velázquez in the 60s because of this sense of aesthetic understatement that he found was cool. That's exactly
cool,
what
yeah.
it was. And coolness in the 60s was defined, or, felt akin to this sense of understatement. Rubens is the opposite, rhetorical, overblown.
Yeah.
Io is really sad, that Kiefer, and she's tragic and she's crying, and her pain is all out there. Velázquez would paint discreet, subtle pain. And I remember Jonathan wrote that, cool, Velázquez was cool in the 60s, clearly for him. So I think coolness is also something that's bound by time. What's cool to us is different than what was cool to them, I think.
No, that's probably true. Yeah, I think they both look cool, to be honest. I like both, and every time I go to the Prado, I'm captivated by both. So you can admire them both, and they both. I mean, Diego Velázquez just looks like a quintessential Spanish guy, right, from the 17th century, and Rubens looks more like an international dude. I don't know. Maybe that's the only difference.
I think the way they both portray themselves has a little bit. There's a great saying in Spanish, Emma, that I don't know how to translate this into English, but dime de que presumes y te diré de que careces.
Oh, that's a difficult one. It's like, it's like, tell me, when you're like,
if you brag about something, what's true is the opposite.
It's probably the opposite, yes.
And it's often true in life. And I think both Velázquez and Rubens, when they portray themselves, they're showing signs of their nobility. Right. And that's because the world is not allowing them to be noble in blood. And they're both pretending. They're both saying, I'm hot stuff. And the world is telling them.
Are we all though pretending?
This is the fake it till you make it type of a deal, right?
You know what it reminded me of really quickly? Nicholas Hilliard too seems to do that. And he works for Elizabeth I of England for the last Tudor queen. And he's also like trying very hard to portray himself as a nobleman, because that's what he's trying to acquire through the patronage of Queen Elizabeth. So it must be more common to these artists than we know and we think of. I think Rebecca and I concentrated too much on the bar fights, and we don't realize they were refined guys with amazing hats and a very great sense of fashion too. You see these pictures of these guys and you're like, they thought their outfit through, that's for sure. And that's the way to portray themselves as noblemen, really. It's a projection, right?
That was the ideal for a painter as well, as I mentioned earlier. Painter wanted to be a court painter. That's, we've learned to admire other looks. But imagine if Picasso's Rubens-like. He's incredibly productive. One of the real giants, no doubt about it in terms of his artistic imagination. But he pretends, because he's post-19th century, he pretends he's kind of in a state of undress in his studio full of dirty stuff all over the place. If Picasso had been born in the age of Rubens or Velázquez, he would have self-portrayed himself with a nice hat, the golden chain, dressed in fancy black, trying to look like a king, no doubt. That's what he would have done. Ambitious artists like Picasso, a Picasso of the 17th century, that's what Velázquez and Rubens are in terms of how they want to show themselves.
Another artist that portrays herself with the chain in working for the Queen of England is Artemisa Gentileschi, and she portrays herself in a picture as the personification of painting, because that's a woman, and she can do that. She can personify painting because she's a woman. And she's wearing some bling in that self-portrait that is still in the royal collection. So the women
a lot of those golden chains were actual gifts sanctioned by time. This is the stories told in antiquity about Aristotle and Alexander and so on. These were gifts from princes to artists. So Artemisia is showing off her chain, saying, I'm an important artist. Rubens is more discreet, but you can see a few links of a chain in his neck there. So they, again, when they paint, they're transforming the way the world looks. When they paint themselves, they're showing off, clearly showing off. They're not saying I'm a bohemian lowlife. No, they don't want that. They want the exact opposite. In part because the world is telling them you're lowlife, and they're saying, well, we don't think so. We want to be higher up in the social ladder.
And also, but they are respecting the past, and they are copying the great painters. And I wanted to, I know we're almost done with our time, but I wanted to bring up a very famous portrait in the Prado Museum by Rubens of Sir Thomas More, right? That he presumably paints in England, obviously, because he's copying from Holbein. When I was looking at this inventory of Charles I, the Holbeins are next to these portraits of Dürer, so they're pulling from the past too.
A very interesting thing to say in a podcast that most often focuses on history and not art history is how art history, or the practice of art as defined in Europe for centuries, is very genealogical. Artists are very aware of what has happened before them and are trying to drive or conduct the art of painting into the future. They have a great sense of, and they don't want to be, at this time, they don't want to be original above anything else, like they will want to be later on in the 20th century, maybe. It is very important to be that link in a chain where your connection to the past is obvious. And the learning of artists from the past is a key thing. And this is one of the things that makes the love of art a beautiful thing, that you're constantly making connections. Oh, the Holbein or Titian or constantly. And Velázquez is learning from Rubens when Rubens is in Madrid. And 100 years later, Goya is learning from Velázquez because Goya is then court painter. And Velázquez has learned from Rubens. Rubens comes to Madrid. He copies every Titian in the Royal Collection. He's learning. And this is one of the reasons why the history of art, I think it's also in a way a metaphor or an analogy for our own lives. We're also very much defined by our parents, and we very much define the lives and the personalities and the ways of being in the world of our children, and on it goes. And this idea that we are genealogical creatures, well, the art of painting is very telling in that regard. And the 20th century was very keen on art being original. But during the time of Velázquez and Rubens, artists were very keen on showing how they knew about the art of the past and how they quoted it. And they were part of that same chain. They wanted to be kind of an active part of one long chain.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
The Abercrombie Kids Summer Sale is in full swing, with up to 50% off select styles for the season. Summer plans, vacation, and camp days are all covered, with new dresses, shorts, tees, and swim. Abercrombie Kids has the summer staples they need and the looks that they want to wear. Shop in-store, online, or in the app. Offer applies to select styles as indicated. Discount applied at checkout online.
I love that. And I love that all the pairings that you've done with Rubens and Velázquez, how different and similar they were. And to finish with Holbein, who is the greatest Tudor artist in the Tudor court, I'm going to ask you both, who would you pair Holbein with in Parallel Lives? Oh, Rebecca just looked at me like, what?
Don't ask me.
Come on.
Don't ask me either, Rebecca. I'm with Rebecca. Maybe Dürer would be a good one.
Yeah. That's the one I was thinking, Alejandro.
There's a great, Dürer writes a diary. When the Emperor Maximilian dies, I think this is 1519 or so, Dürer goes to Brussels because the new emperor, the heir, Charles V, is in Brussels, and Dürer goes there to secure his salary as court painter. And he writes a diary. He mentions how much hotels cost and how much bread cost and the parties. And
The Lonely
he's giving
Planet of the 16th century.
But do we have anything like that from Holbein? Holbein is incredible. What a
Holbein,
painter, right?
the sketchbook, not as much about his life, but his sketchbook has so many sketches. And he's got a lot of production in terms of designs of jewels, and then Hollard copies a lot. So a lot of Holbein has been copied, and there's a great production of Holbein. We don't know as much about his life as we would like.
That allows me to say something I wanted to say that I have almost forgot. To me, and this is, we all have our own way of relating to art, and they're all just as good. But since we're here, we can talk about ours for whatever it's worth. To me, art matters much, much more than biography. The reason why I came to all this has to do with how I was ignited in an odd way by brushstrokes and by, formal transformation in a statue or in a sculpture, whatever. Just you can take that to music, how what one feels in the presence of great art, that feeling comes from art, not from biography. Which means that you can have an incredible artist that can move you to your core, who may have run over 25 turtles or rabbits or whatever and be a horrible person.
Yeah.
To me, that makes no difference at all, because I need that moment of that connection with that art. I just need that. And on the other hand, learning about biography can illuminate the art. Of course it can. And on the other hand, having said all this, if someone is more interested in Durer's biography than art, there's nothing wrong with that either. We each can
I'm
do
really
whatever.
interested in his self-portrait in your collection. Rebecca, have you seen the self-portrait of Durer that is in the Prado Museum? It was in the collection of Charles I of England, bought by Christina of Sweden, and he looks like a rock star.
Is that the one with the super curly hair?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the one. That's the one. So when you go to Madrid, Alejandro can show you that self-portrait of Durer.
Rebecca, definitely let me know when you come, but not yet. I see you're going to London first. That's just as good.
Too bad.
Yes, 2026 is the year of Spain.
Oh, okay. Good.
Okay.
That's well, Alejandro, this has been a lot of fun having you on the show today to look at the parallel lives of Rubens and Velázquez. And I can't thank you enough for joining Emma and I to kind of dive a little bit deeper into these guys, because I feel like when it comes to this show, Emma has been the one who has really brought art history alive, and I'm so grateful that she knows you and that you're able to kind of add to that as well. So thank you so much.
Well, I love doing it. I thank both of you. I think, sometimes when I hear myself, I feel that, Emma too, I think, that we're too opinionated maybe, or too sure about our taste or favorite art. And it's important for me to say that, I think it's all about sparking interest.
Yeah.
And once that's done, the next person should be just as opinionated, and hopefully their opinion will be the opposite from ours. That makes no difference. So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being informed. One, I really do think that being a historian, an art historian with a proper training and all the rigor that comes with that matters a lot. But then it's about sparking interest and having other people, dive into this and having their own relationship with its art and with the past.
Well, I'm sure everybody will want to go to the Prado Museum this summer to see Velázquez and Rubens and meet these cool guys and their art, because it is amazing. So I thank you again, Alejandro, for coming today and putting up with us and all our jokes and our, a little. We like to make it fun. We've been told we do a good job, so we're going to keep at it. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.